Welcome everyone. We've just got a few technical problems, but we think we're there now. So welcome to our first Community Energy Forum. This is our first in a series of webinars. First, a few housekeeping things. My name is Paul Duggan. I'm a BREAZE volunteer and I'll be your MC for the night. This session is being recorded and will be available soon. We'll take questions after all four presenters have completed their talks. There's a little QA button at the bottom of your screen, so put any questions you have in there so you don't forget. There'll also be two quick polls as part of this webinar. If you haven't completed a Zoom poll before, it's very simple. You'll be presented with a question, just pick the answer that best suits you. First of all, and very importantly, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting tonight. In my case, the Wadawurrung people. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and Aboriginal elders of the other communities who may be here today. Participants may like to introduce themselves in the chat, noting that traditional owners of their area. Okay, what is a Community Power Hub? The Community Power Hub is a continuation of a program that has started over 3 years ago. This program is funded by Sustainability Victoria. Its purpose is to identify potential community energy projects. We will then evaluate these projects, complete feasibilities, and help to implement them. The Community Power Hub is run by BREAZE, Ballarat Renewable Energy and Zero Emissions, which is a not-for-profit environmental group. As well as the several volunteers involved, we will soon have 2 staff members. What type of projects are we talking about? Well, it's really all types, from solar panels for community centres, solar and maybe batteries for social housing. Not only do we want to generate power, but we also want to organise energy audits to see how community can save the power. There's also a growing interest for larger projects involving concepts like neighbourhood batteries and solar farms. We'll hear a couple about these tonight. Also, think outside the square, like biomass and other storage options. We're interested in whatever you think of, don't restrict yourself. Why are we here? What we want to do tonight is to inspire you to contact us with your projects. We don't care what size your project is, your experience, your knowledge. What we do want is enthusiasm and a willingness to work with us to bring your ideas to life. To do this, we have 4 great speakers who come from a variety of backgrounds and experience to get you thinking about community energy and what you can achieve. To start us off, we have BREAZE's Ian Rossiter, who was a member of the project control group for the Ballarat Community Power Hub Pilot, which ran from 2017 to 2020. The Ballarat Hub contributed studies for multiple community energy projects, most of which now have been completed. Ian's going to talk about one of the bigger projects involving solar PV and a backup battery. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'd like to talk tonight about the Ballarat Cemeteries. The Ballarat Cemeteries is actually run by a community organisation. It's got its own trust, community elected. Although it comes under government regulation, it was quite incredible when we got a phone call from BREAZE, from the Ballarat Cemeteries saying, you know what, we're a bit interested in putting some solar panels and looking at solar, but we're just not sure how to do all this stuff. And that coincided with the commencement of the Ballarat Community Power Hub. So what actually happened is we had a look at not just the potential to put solar panels on an existing business, but also to think outside the square a bit and go, well, part of this is also about energy conservation. It's about looking at where renewable energy fits and will your business change over time? But just briefly, before we get into that, the Community Power Hub Ballarat was lucky to be extended by an additional 12 months, which meant that we had a lot of really what we call low-hanging fruit, easy wins. We had lots of community groups that we just needed to go and provide a bit of technical expertise to show how they could look at PV solar systems to actually offset their running costs. And that included recreation facilities, a neighbourhood house, community halls. And so I don't want to put people off tonight by thinking, oh my God, this cemeteries project took 3 years to deliver and was really complex, because there's a whole suite of things that we can be doing. Back to the cemeteries. Okay, next slide, please, Marie. So the project timeline is a bit scary because, as I said, we started back in November 2017 and we're still now looking at a 99 kilowatt solar farm getting built this next month, October. But a lot of the stuff that happened, we've got some learnings I want to share with you tonight. So we might move to the next slide and talk about what we actually considered and implemented. Thank you. Okay, so the starting point was to look at the cemetery's historical electricity and gas bills. The cemetery operates two great big cremators. They have a huge network of irrigation because they have their own water catchment and dam. They run an awful lot of small plant and medium plant equipment, everything from brush cutters through to diggers. So what we actually looked at was where could we put solar panels? We used a software program which anyone can access called Sunulator. If they go to the Renew website, it explains how you can input the data that you get from Powercore from the meter data, and it looks at where you are located in Australia, the angle of your roof, the direction off north of your roof is orientated towards, and it gives you an immediate printout of what solar electricity you could produce from 4 or 5 different scenarios or different size PV systems. We also did a study to look at the crematoria produces all this heat that just goes up the chimney to the atmosphere, thinking, well, surely that energy could be used for something else. Maybe the heat could be reused within the facility, or we could take the heat and produce electricity. We also decided it's not about just business as usual. It's about looking at what changes could be made to the irrigation, to the types of vehicles and small plant that was being used to make it more energy efficient and electric instead of using petrochemicals. We also looked at a number of different connections that the cemetery had. They had 6 different meters and connections, and they were paying these huge fixed costs on each of them, and whether we could consolidate them to reduce those costs. Because they have such a large irrigation dam, we looked at whether they could actually have a floating PV system, which has been used at lots of sewage treatment plants and reservoirs. And we weighed that up against ground-mounted systems, which are more conventional. We also investigated how all these improvements could be brought about without the cemetery having to borrow money. And that's where power purchasing agreements, PPAs, can be taken on board as a funding vehicle. In other words, you might sign up to an angel investor that comes along to actually fund all these changes and then sells you the renewable energy back over a 20-year period. And lastly, because what we found out is most of the energy is produced during a limited period of the day, a lot of the energy goes into irrigation at night. Could battery storage and smart use systems be part of the equation? Next slide, please, Murray. So what we came up with is investment in variable speed pumps. They had a couple of large irrigation pumps that every time they turned them on, the lights would go out in the whole Invermay area because the amount of electricity taken to start up these pumps. Variable speed pump technology means it's less power intensive. We looked at investing in all-terrain personnel carriers instead of the 2-stroke ones that they had. Electric small plant, we're talking about hedge clippers, brush cutters, walk-behind mowers, and many such things were able to be converted to electricity. So that plant was always turned over every 2 years anyway. And obviously mains consolidation, looking at reducing the number of mains inlets from the Powercore grid with where they could be combined to reduce the fixed meter charges. We investigated 129 kilowatts of photovoltaic installations and also a 30 kilowatt hour lithium battery. And we came up with a 20-year deal through Solar Bay where Solar Bay would fund all of these improvements to the grid and to the solar panels and that would be repaid over a 20-year period through the power purchasing agreement for the power that came back from the solar panels. All of the supply and installation was done by Smart Commercial Solar, which are a local Victorian supplier. Next slide, please. So what we can see here is on their machinery shed is a 30 kilowatt system. And what we did there is we actually took two mains inlets that were coming off the south area of the cemetery, and with fairly low technology, we were able to combine consolidation to make one mains connection that immediately gave a huge relief in terms of cost. And those 30 kilowatt power systems that are on the roof effectively negated the power used on the pumping system on the irrigation dam, which was on the same connection. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a lithium battery and its control systems. So that's what it looks like. That's a 30 kilowatt hour, 29.7 kilowatt hour battery, which is in a secure location on the outside of the administration building. And it just goes to show, you know, it really doesn't make a huge impact on the external or the internal aspects of the facility. But what it meant was we were able to get a grant from the Grampians Renewable Energy funding, because the cemetery actually provides an essential service. I hate to say this, it's bad timing, but crematoriums have to operate because during a pandemic, it's really important that they continue even if there's a power outage. So we were able to argue the case that this was a much better investment than buying generators to make sure the crematorium can operate. But the dual benefit of this is not only does it allow a reliable supply for the crematorium, it also means that with smart controllers, those batteries are drawn down every night to mean that the power that is generated during the day is then used for the irrigation systems. It also provides a really reliable backup supply, not only to the crematorium, but also to all the admin facilities of what is, a community facility. So it actually took us 3 years. We might move to the next slide. But the things that we've really learned from this project is it doesn't happen without an internal champion. The reason it took 3 years is in the meantime, we dealt with 2 different operations managers, and it really meant that until there was somebody at that maybe second level in the organisation that was really switched onto this project, saw it as a priority, time took a long time. We saw lots of pregnant pauses in the project. We also learned, don't assume business as usual, because when you're looking at energy consumption for an organisation for 5 or 10 or 20 years, clearly things are going to change. So you've got to look at size and consumption and what might happen in the future. We also found that there were 3 parties willing to fund the project through a 20-year power purchasing agreement, Clear Sky Investments, probably the first playing in that space, Mondo Energy and Solar Bay all put in tenders to basically allow the cemetery to do that stuff without having to borrow money or find the cash to do it. The project timeframe could have been shortened by 12 or more months if we didn't have some of the interruptions that we had in those time delays I talked about. And the roadblocks that caused those were, as I mentioned, staff changeover or staff commitment to the actual project, power core approval times. And again, if you're dealing with a project where you're putting in 130 kilowatts of solar, clearly it takes a long time for power core to come back and say, yes, no, how that might relate to feeding power back into the grid. And also dealing with the trust, which is their board, their meeting cycle, they only met every second month. So to get decisions around financial investment, tenders, contracts, each of those decisions pushed us out by another 2 or 3 months. So if you want to collapse that, there's a number of ways you could do that. And it might be about the size scale. It might also be about making sure that the decision makers on the board, the trust, the committee that organises what happens in a place are fully briefed right from the beginning, so that when decisions need to be made, they don't get pushed out to the next meeting. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for those insights. It's always great to hear the learnings from projects that have gone before. We're very hopeful that we can be as successful as the previous Ballarat pilot, because that had some very great successes there. Just a note, if you've got questions or chat, please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. It's just a bit easier for us to track those than in the chat. And now we'll conduct our first poll. If Marie could just post that up for us, that'd be great. One of our major objectives is to get all the Grampians region involved in the Community Power Hub. And so there's 11 LGAs. So just post in your poll which area you're from to give us some idea of what audience we've got here tonight. It is a huge region, and COVID allowing, we're hoping to visit every region at least once. Please let us know if you want us to visit, or if there's an event we can attend which will help us all together. We've also formed a roundtable advisory group with representatives from all over the Grampians to help us with ideas and review the projects. So very quick poll. So hopefully you got your results in if you want to post the results. Good. As you can see, we've got a good spread. There's a few people outside, and as we suspected, Hindmarsh, West Wimmera and Yarrambuck up the real west, we need to get more people involved because we're very keen to get people involved across the whole region. But thank you for that. Now to another community energy champion. Edwin Noven is the president of the Nether Community Energy Group. Nether, for those of you who don't know, is a township of approximately 500 people situated in the heart of Victorian rock climbing territory, near Mount Eryples in the Shire of Horsham. Nether Community Energy Group has set its sight on community solar farm. This is a story with many twists and turns, and there's no one better qualified to tell it than Edwin, who's been there from the start. Over to you, Edwin.
Right, thanks very much. My name's Edwin Irvine. I'm the president of Nether Community Energy. And first off, I'd like to acknowledge that Nether is on the traditional lands of the Watchabollock, the Jadwa, the Jadwa-Jali, the Wagaya and the Yapagok people. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So yeah, Nether's a small town. The town itself is about 300 people. The postcode around it's about 500 people. And yeah, it's in Western Victoria near Horsham. And although we're a small town, we punch above our weight. We hosted the first Triple J one night stand in 2004. We were the first town to receive the Small Towns Transformation Project funding. And we've been holding the Natty Fringe every 2 years for the last 20 years, which is like an enormous party that everyone gets invited to. Australia's first dedicated rock climbing film festival started in Nether 18 years ago, and it's ongoing still today, although we're online rather than in person given the COVID situation. And we are also 14 years down the path of pursuing Next slide, please, if I could. Or am I doing that? Oh, thank you. So in 2007, the Horsham Council ran the Community Building Initiative project in Nether. And this was a project where just about everyone in town participated. And it established the big, long wish list of all the things that we wanted to have in the town. And key among these was for Nether to pursue renewable energy. So we did. Some of us organised a bulk purchase of rooftop solar systems. And so with enough of us, we could get an installer to come up from Melbourne for a week and install 6 or so rooftop solar systems on houses. And that worked pretty well. We then approached the CSIRO for some assistance in doing a carbon footprint audit of the town. And this was a really good exercise because through a series of workshops and meetings with, you know, residents and the businesses in town, we got a really good understanding of what our carbon footprint was. And that's good knowledge to have to then go forward to pursue further renewable energy projects. So we then did a second bulk purchase of rooftop solar. And this time there was a lot more interest from across the town, which is not unusual when you look back at Nadimak's got a long history of early adoption of alternative energy. And this goes right back to the 1980s, and where the local plumber had the license for solar hot water systems. And you can see all those solar hot water systems still on people's roofs today, except now there next to them are a lot of photovoltaic panels, where we now have a little over 30% of the houses in Nadimak with rooftop solar systems in place. So along with that, interest in renewable energy continued to kind of grow in the community, and, you know, people were like raising questions like, well, what if you don't have the upfront cash for a rooftop system? What if you don't own the house? Is it still worthwhile to do, even though you're not getting much for your feed-in tariff? So these sorts of questions, you know, people are mulling over. And then one afternoon in 2015, over some beers and wood-fired pizza down at the Nadimak Community Pizza Oven, Nadimak Community Energy came into being. So what do we do now? Another bulk purchase? Sure, we could. We've done them before, we can do them again. But how about we take this up a level? So we applied for and received a grant from the New Energy Jobs Fund, which we used to investigate what were the most effective means of renewable energy that were suitable for a town like Nadimak. So with that funding, we ran a whole series of workshops and seminars, and we got people coming in from interstate and from Melbourne to present to us what are all the ideas that are out there in renewable energy. And from all that, we shortlisted 3 projects. And one of them was a behind-the-meter rooftop solar installation on the local hospital, which was the major power consumer in the town. Second one was to build a microgrid, and the third one was to build a solar farm. So we ran another community engagement session, and this time we had it set up like a cafe where there were 3 tables. Each table had one of those projects on it, and the participants came in, sat at the table and had that project pitched to them. And then they could ask questions and have a discussion and then move on to the next table for the next pitch. So throughout the evening, everyone got to have each of the 3 projects pitched to them. And then they were all given 2 little stickers to go and vote for which one of those projects was their preferred one, and the solar farm won. So, yeah, so the solar farm won. And the idea of the solar farm is that it produces an equivalent amount of electricity to what Nadimak consumes in a year. And if we go to the next slide, please. So this takes us a long way in achieving our mission, which is that Nadimak Community Energy aims to be a leader of community-generated energy in Western Victoria. We will endeavour to establish workable and shareable community energy systems for small regional towns and aim to be 100% renewable by 2030. So moving on from then, we were fortunate to get another grant through the New Energy Jobs Fund. And this time we're spending that money on getting all the approvals that we need for the solar farm. As you know, there's several of those. Plus, oh, sorry, I'll go back a tick. Yeah, we got a second grant and the second grant was for technical feasibility and a business case. And both of those studies identified that the project was technically feasible and financially viable, but complex. Can I have the next slide, please? And here's a flow chart that was prepared as part of the feasibility study. And I can guarantee you that actually building the solar farm is far more complex than what that flow chart shows. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So some of the benefits from the solar farm project is like, yeah, we'll reduce our carbon emissions. There will be local employment opportunities. There'll be opportunities for education and training over the life of the project. But what I think is really the key benefit of the project is that Nanamark will take back control of its energy future. So when someone pays for their power bill, that money stays in the community. So, yeah, then we received our third grant through the New Energy Jobs Fund, and this is the one that we're spending on getting the approvals and establishing the governance entity for the operation of the solar farm and preparing the investment prospectus, which we'll use to raise the capital required for construction. Next slide, please. So we've achieved a few of the milestones in this current round of the project, and key ones amongst them is that we've now secured the site for the solar farm and that now our steady state modelling has been completed, so we're ready for our grid connection application to proceed. They're two pretty big milestones for us to hit. Next slide, please. But as you can see, there's still quite a few more steps for us to go through, and they're all pretty challenging, particularly the third last one there, where we need to raise the capital for construction, which is ballpark figure probably going to be between $2.5 and $3 million, of which we're committed to 51% community ownership. So that means 51% of the cost of construction has to come from the community. So we've been going for 14 years, and we have the next slide, please. And this is where we want to be. We want to be starting making energy. So like I say, it's been going for 14 years, and sometimes we've suffered the slings and arrows that have come our way through this, and we're a volunteer community group. All our members have got day jobs and other commitments. Like this is one of 3 committees that I sit on, as well as trying to run my business. So it's hard to keep volunteers motivated over the long term, particularly if they're not familiar with delivering complex projects. And we're not doing this project because it's easy. So if there's one key message that I'd like to get across to communities thinking about renewable energy is be prepared for the long haul. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. Hats off to your perseverance. That's great, and keep on going there. Certainly it's not, community energy is not easy. Community ownership takes community commitment. And as that flowchart showed, there's many hurdles along the way and it can be complex. Now, there are a lot simpler projects than that one and the next one coming up, so don't get dismayed, but we are here to help and get you through the simple and the complex projects. And next off, it's over to Eddie. So it's that payoff and that energy independence and that resilience for reduced emissions and reduced costs that we're looking for that drives the work of our next speaker, Eddie Ostovich, who is the member of St Arnaud Community Renewable Energy Association. And Eddie, you're calling it STAR, aren't you?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Paul. And I'll say, in the best tradition of Paul Hogan, good evening, viewers. wanted to title our presentation, our Star Energy presentation, "You Want What by When," because there's a perception, and Edwin really touched on it beautifully, that these things are expected quicker than they actually turn out to be. Next slide, please, Murray. So Star Energy, we haven't been running as long as Edwin, but we started in an ominous time in February 2019, and Star Energy was born by a direct question by Margaret Fife, and she said, "Why can't we have our own community-owned renewable wind power station?" Really simple question. And the other thing that drives us at St Arnaud is a statement by John Simon from Aussie Home Loans: "The best way of predicting the future is to create it," which clearly Nadamuck have also taken on board. So Star Energy was born, and consequently in March 2019 we had this little fight with COVID. Next slide, please, Murray. So, like a lot of things, we wanted to provide local energy supply and services. Interestingly, St Arnaud had its own generating capacity back in the 50s, 60s, and up to the first part of the 70s. And until then, it was fossil fuel derived energy, and then the centralised power stations were built in Gippsland because that's where the fossil fuels were, the brown and black coal. We're now seeing the reversion back to decentralised power generation, which is really fascinating. We also wanted to strengthen our economic and social base because, you know, we're seeing a bleed of resource, skill sets and human capital out of the communities that we really enjoy. And so consequently, creating jobs and improving career opportunities for our community members, particularly our youth, is very, very important. And power is an enabling technology. It enables you to value add to commodities that we produce in the western part of Victoria. It enables you to do a number of things. Next slide, please. So this is where we ended up after February. And I've got to say to you, the number of things that we didn't know was profound. It reminded many of us of Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Defence Secretary for George W. Bush. I'm sure all of you remember his spectacular speech of, "We all know what we know what we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know." Now, that third element is probably one of the most challenging issues that we all face. Next slide, please. As I say, there's a conceptual shift here. We've moved from decentralised power to centralised power. Now we're coming back to decentralised power. And we're seeing a shift in the older power stations. Hazelwood was decommissioned in 2017, Yallourn in 2025, brought forward from 2032. There are 5 stations in New South Wales: Liddell at 22, Vales Point in 24, and so on, Eraring, Bayswater, Mount Piper. So by 2030, there'll be 7 power stations, significant power stations, that will be decommissioned. St Arnaud happens to be on the last leg of the power distribution from Charlton, so we're in a less stable environment, and we see blackouts here, small, short blackouts, but they happen frequently, and there's no reason to believe that they are going to be improving over time. They're only going to get worse. It's pretty clear. There's also very little or no investment in energy generation or delivery to our region. AusNet's Western Victorian transmission network is probably the exception, and it's taking renewables from the western part of the state to the metropolitan areas. So pretty clearly, community-owned and operated decentralised power generation is the new model, the new delivery model, and we saw that from Nadamuck's presentation. Next slide, please. So we had to develop a plan. So what's the plan? It's all well and good to say we'd like to have a renewable energy power station powering St Arnaud and parts of the district. We also have to determine the project feasibility. we needed to establish a brief for the renewable hybrid. Now, we're calling it a hybrid energy project because we are technologically agnostic. We do believe that our strength is in solar, but we also understand that there's a place for wind when solar's not shining. Pardon me. We needed to define and develop a feasibility study leading to a business case. We're adopting a financial investment decision model so that we, as we engage with the community, we have very clear milestones, and we heard that from Natamak. There are very clear milestones and steps all the way through this process. And Edwin's absolutely right, and he's got more experience than we have. This is a convoluted process. We engaged with Victoria University, particularly because they've got a centre on energy, renewable energy policy development. And of course, the question is, how much, what energy demand do you require? So that's got to be looked at in terms of energy demand. The next big ticket item was the community ownership model. How do we own this thing? What does it take? And these are the things we're working through now. And similarly, the operating rules, the feed-in tariffs, the peak energy supply, the structure, all of the things that are required for an asset to be developed. Next slide, please. So the activities, some of the big ticket items are, risk reward. What are the risks and rewards of new energy generation? Because there are risks. There's technological risks, there's financial risks, there's operational risks, and so on. We needed to involve the community and generate interest and participation. Now, from a community of 300 people at Natamak to a community of 2,000 people at St Arnaud, there's a significant gap in population, and it's a challenge to generate and maintain interest, as Edwin quite rightly pointed out. Everyone's got day jobs on our steering committee, and it takes a lot of effort to engage with, deliberately engage with the community. We've determined our energy demand at nominally 2.8 megawatt hours, and we've looked at 5 megawatt hours of energy storage because I think that's a fairly significant factor here, and I'll come to that in a minute. Understanding the limitations of the distribution network from a closed shop perspective, which Powercore has been up until recently, has been a key challenge that we found, and the site requirements for the development are also fairly important because 2.8 megawatts of energy will require just the panel area alone is 2 hectares. So you need a minimum of 5 hectares of country for access, for maintenance, and then on top of that you've got the establishment of the batteries and so forth. How you implement them to prevent islanding or to promote islanding is a key issue. Next slide, please. As I say, we're technologically agnostic, but we do believe a hybrid technology mix is important, particularly in our geographic area. You'll find, for those of you that are looking at establishing a renewable energy system, connectivity constraints remain a challenge, both in terms of distribution and how you overcome islanding issues. The advent of smart meter technologies and the Internet of Things to seamlessly manage the supply and distribution and revenue generation, revenue collection is also coming to the fore. I keep on coming back to power islands because power islanding is a significant issue, but it also helps Powercore in our region to restart the network when there are blackouts. And similarly, an integrated energy storage system, which with our 5 megawatt desire of 5 megawatt hour desire of batteries is important, and the type of battery as well. There are ultra capacitors, the lithium ion, there's redox flow batteries, and so forth. Next slide, please. One of the interesting things in our assessment is the peak energy supply. Now, there are companies out there that are trying to take advantage of that, with such as Power Ledger. Peak supply contracts are based on a 5 to 30 minute duration through the Australian Energy Market Operator, and they can provide a lucrative income that are certainly in the order of magnitude multiples of commercial peak tariffs of nominally 30 cents a kilowatt hour, and they can rise up to $14.50 per kilowatt hour infrequently when the demand is high and supply is short. Supply constraints will only exacerbate this condition, so I think this is an area where we'll be looking to understand the implications more. Next slide, thanks, Mary. Very simple graphic of what we're looking at, and it talks about private investors in our space. We've got a number of community members that are interested in investing in the Renewable Energy Hub. Some are corporates who are significant users of energy in our region, in our town, in fact. Similarly, you can see we've got solar PV and wind turbines in that box, and energy storage, providing electricity supply for exporting peak supply to the grid, retail and business consumers, and then we have operating revenue for the business. Next slide, please. So what and how long? I did say you want what by when. So there are a number of steps, and I think Edwin was very clear on that relatively short flow chart with about 30 steps as I could count. Some of the things that we have to look at are the business models for community-owned power generation. We need to explore the investment appetite. What are the key commercial risks, key partners of success, transmission limitations, and the location? Now, in terms of batteries, location is less important, but nevertheless, if you're looking at power islanding, they are significantly important in terms of how they sit in the overall dendrite of the distribution network. The impact of local power supplies on regional economies and economics, that's an area where we're starting to gain further information, and that comes through to revenue projections, because at the end of the day, if we want a community renewable energy business, it has to be able to self-sustain itself over the long term to replace assets as they fall due. These are some of the issues that govern the what and the how. And I think that's it. Mara, is it? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. So it's really back to the future for St Arnaud, to energy security. As with Pomona, a lot of these areas, they used to have their own local power generation, and we're going back to that again. And as Eddie mentioned, it's a problem that with other communities at the end of the transmission lines where they get power outages and insecure power. So do consider getting in touch with us if your community has that problem. Now it's time for our second poll. We'll keep this as quick as possible. But we're just getting some idea where you're up to in your project and if you're interested or not. So we want to help you no matter where you are at in your project. We're also very interested in the projects that are outside of the square. So we want to hear your ideas and hear your success stories. So please contact us. So please have a quick look at the poll and we can see where people are at with their different projects. Okay, let's see where people are at. Well, so as we suspected, I suppose, there's not a lot of people not involved. A lot of people want to explore ideas, so we'll get in contact with you all. And we need you to drive we're only a small community, few staff, and we need the community out there driving things. So we're happy to work with you, but we need you driving the projects. And to give you some more ideas, we'll go over to Taryn now. She's our final speaker. Taryn is from the manager of the Hepburn Wind, Australia's first community-owned wind farm, and has been working in this space for a long time now and is across the emerging business models and what's possible. Taryn is also a fellow member of our Grampians Community Power Hub project control group. Over to you, Taryn.
Great, thanks. Hey, everyone. Super cool to just hear of everybody else's stories as well around the Grampians region. There's a lot of experience, which is great. So yeah, just I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of Hepburn Wind and some of the things we're up to, but I'm really going to talk more broadly about what sorts of projects could be relevant for the region and what some kind of models and technologies could be, just to get people thinking. So for those of you that don't know about Hepburn Wind, we are the first community-owned wind farm in Australia. We've been operating for more than 10 years. We're very proudly an all-woman executive, so we're an all-woman run wind farm, and we are 100% community-owned and operated. Oh, we've just lost the slides. Murray might have dropped off. That's okay. Paul, I'll just share screen from my screen.
You going to do it, Taryn? Yep.
Yep, just give you a sec. Can everybody see that? Okay. Great. Okay. Quick save. Hopefully Murray will get back on.
Go to full screen though, Taryn. You've still got the.
Yeah. It's just gone black for a second.
Oh.
Still hasn't come up for me. I'm not sure. Okay. Now it's up. Can you guys open your...
No, it's still on the slide view, but probably just keep going.
Okay, great. So we have 4.1 megawatts of wind, so 2 turbines, and that generates enough electricity to offset from where the wind farm is through to Hepburn Springs, so including Dalesford, so about 2,100 homes on average each year. And we recently submitted a planning application to add 7.4 megawatts of solar up at the wind farm site and a 10 megawatt hour battery. So that'll bring us up to about another 1,900 homes as well across the Shire. And we're very happy to be running the Hepburn branch of the Grampians Community Power Hub and supporting our community to reach our targets of zero net emissions by 2030 and zero net energy by 2025. So this screen will give you a bit of an idea of what's happening in the Shire at the moment. So we're already at 37% renewable across the Shire. But as I said, we've got this target of 2025 reaching zero net energy. And we're already starting to see a significant amount of export limiting.
So,
in regards
Taryn, I don't think your slides are going over. It's still on the Hepburn Wind overview slide. Well, that's what I'm saying.
It is on my screen. That's a shame. Just try again. How's that? Which
That's
one is
better.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, so as I was saying, this is a map of the Shire, and it shows what's happening in our various wards and the towns associated with those wards. And we're currently at 37%. And so what's happening is a lot of people want to get solar. A lot of people are having issues with exporting to the grid because we're getting fairly full across our area. So that makes things like neighbourhood batteries more and more relevant for our Shire so that we can unlock more capacity. So some of the things that we're working on in the Hepburn Shire is what we're calling quick win projects. So we're trying to get as many of our community facilities to have solar, to have batteries, to have energy efficiency, and really connecting them to grants and funding pathways. We were recently successful with our council and Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance to get some funding in from the Victorian government for the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative. And our project is called Community Sparks. And we're looking at 5 sites in the Hepburn Shire to deploy community batteries in order to unlock more solar and also deal with other aspects like bushfire risk and local resilience. And there's 6 other external councils that are also participating in that project. And we're also connecting businesses with the Small Business Energy Saver program. And this is an opportunity across our region where businesses can secure up to $2,000 to support them to do energy efficiency measures. So when we talk about energy and renewable energy and types of projects that might be appropriate for community energy, the technologies that we're talking about are really solar PV, mid-scale solar farms like the Nattermook and St Arnaud experience, microgrids, virtual power plants, residential or community batteries, micro wind, bioenergy, mid to large scale wind. So obviously there's also a lot of that in the region. The procurement of renewable energy is another pathway, as is energy efficiency and the emergent renewable hydrogen. So some of the really common models of community energy, I think the most common is bulk buys. So we run and we partner with MASH in the Hepburn Shire to run the Hepburn Solar Bulk Buy, which does solar PV and battery storage. We're also now starting to see electric vehicle bulk buys. So we ran one last year with the Good Car Company, and heat pumps as well are quite emergent. Then there's donation models. So this might be where you crowdfund to donate a solar system on a community facility, or you might have a revolving loan. I know that Nattermook has been involved in a model like that. We've done a few of those in the Hepburn Shire. And then a third really common model is the small scale ownership model, which is where you might have a group of, say, 20 to 100 investors, and they support a facility to get solar and receive a return for that. And then moving into some other models of community energy, there's the mid-scale ownership model, which is the one that's been brought up a lot here, which is the Hepburn Wind and St Arnaud and Nattermook model. And when we say mid-scale, we mean between 1 and 10 megawatts, and that scale fits on the distribution lines. So under 10 megawatts is distribution level, and 1 to 2 megawatts fits on the low voltage lines. Then there's the large scale co-investment model. So this might be a large scale wind farm that's operating in your area, or that's going to be built. One project I can think about is the Golden Plains Wind Farm, which will open up a portion of their, of their investment portfolio for community investments. So there's really big opportunities across the region for projects like that. Then there's community energy retailing models, microgrid models, and then the 100% renewable or zero carbon communities models as well. Some of the current grants and opportunities across the region that you can tap into, and that the BREAZE or myself and Mari, if in the Hepburn Shire, can help you connect to, is under the state government. There's a great grant round with Sustainability Victoria called the Community Climate Change and Energy Action Program. It's quite a mouthful and a terrible acronym, but it's doing really good things. So there's funding there to either implement solar and or batteries, also to undertake audits, and it's up to $50,000. You need to secure matching funding, but yeah, that's a really good pathway to, particularly if business models don't fully stack up, for you to be able to get some grant money in there and then deploy a project. There's also the Greener Government Schools Buildings, which is a no interest loan for solar. And then outside of the government, there's a great group that operates out of South Australia, but they're national, called Carina, and they essentially have a revolving fund where they can provide zero interest loans to help facilities to go solar and battery. There might be other opportunities in your communities, such as local government grant rounds. If you've got large renewables projects, they might have community funds, and then also local banks are a fantastic partner. We often partner with the local community banks in our shire. Great.
Okay, thanks, Taryn.
Yeah.
So a very broad range of potential renewable energy opportunities out there. Great to hear about. We are running a little bit over time. We've still got a lot of questions and things to go through. So, but we will hang on about and do those questions and answer those now. So we'll just go over to the panel now and we'll check our open questions. So please go to the Q&A tab and put in your questions if you've still got some. So our open questions. Oh. So this is just a general question, not to anyone. With feed-in tariff from Jace, with feed-in tariffs dropping to subsidised power retailers, How do we instead simply get community batteries installed to support home rooftop solar take-up and transition away from the mains grid dependence? Does anyone want to answer that?
Sure, I can have a first comment. So it's not simple. If it was simple, we would see a lot more of them. There's some particular regulatory challenges that are barriers to that, and a lot of the projects that have been built already on the Victorian distribution, although voltage lines, they've been built under an environment of what's called sandboxing, regulatory sandboxing, where they kind of close off the rule box just for this project to get up so that everyone can kind of learn from it. So there does need to be some nuancing of the regulations, and there is, some recent changes that do make some of that easier, but there's still a ways to go. The good thing is that, there's high awareness that these things need to change. And I think the recent bushfires, the recent storms, through our area has highlighted the need for greater grid resilience. And the recent project, the program by the state government to fund feasibility into neighbourhood batteries and to understand what those challenges are and how to unlock them is a great step. So yeah, work's happening, but it's certainly not an easy thing to immediately deploy.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else got anything else to add? No, okay. From Neil Gibbs, are there any full microgrid developments planned for the region? Noting the recently launched Arena microgrid funding round. Taryn, you might be the target here.
Sure, there's quite a few projects that are being worked on. So Trentham has one in the Hepburn Shire. The Dundonnell community has deployed one, which was supported by the Dundonnell Wind Farm, and there are communities that are interested. We don't benefit as much as other areas because we aren't within the AusNet network. So AusNet runs Mondo, which is a subsidiary that they have, which is very supportive of communities unlocking and working with them to unlock microgrids. So it is a little bit more challenging in our context across the Power Core network, but certainly not impossible. And I think something that we'll see more and more of in the coming couple of years.
And I'd like just to add as a general comment, we've got the Grampians Community Power Hub, but there's the Community Power Hubs going all across Victoria. And part of that whole thing is we get together regularly and try and talk about these bigger issues. And through Sustainability Victoria and DELT, we want to talk to the big power companies and stuff and trying to get statewide solutions to these things rather than each individual community trying to fight them out. So that's one of the beauties about the Community Power Hub. Neil had also, but that's more of a comment on Jace's thing. So I'll go back to one that was actually asked, that was answered online, but from Tony Goodfellow, to learn about anything for their Aboriginal partnerships with Aboriginal communities for community energy resulting in outcomes similar to the Rumihuk District Aboriginal Corporation. I will say we are very interested in anything like this. We do have Laverne Lehman on our roundtable advisory group, and she's part of an Aboriginal cooperative, but I can't remember each one. I think it's in the Wimmera, but I can't remember the name of it, etc. So we are very interested in this, and we'll talk to Laverne as we get more staff on board. And if anyone's got any ideas of what we can do, yes, we're happy to push that and talk to those groups and very much want to do that. And Leon also had a question for Taryn. You seem to be the target person, Taryn. Is that why aren't local councils buy into their own green energy instead of buying from the solar and wind farm entrepreneurs who pay the dividends to shareholders whilst becoming land rich? I'm not sure if that's already a comment or if you can answer that or not.
Sure. I mean, look, most councils are doing what they can on their own facilities and on the community facilities that are, under their mandate as well. A lot of community facilities are on Crown land and under the DELT mandate, and there's a lot of grants also, grant streams for those facilities as well. Often it comes down to land access and roof access in order for them to meet their consumption profiles. And there has been a really great project called VICO, which was 48 councils who got together to do a bulk procurement. And, you know, the power of purchasing means that that price is really cheap and that they save a lot of money, and they are supporting, you know, wind and solar farms within the Victorian context. So there's, you know, that bulk procurement piece. But then there's also a whole bunch of councils that are working with, you know, to look at their own, particularly landfills, what councils are looking at. So there's about 8 councils that are looking at landfill sites, disused landfill sites for solar farms. I know our local council is working with Hepburn Wind as well to work out what can be done in regards to the balance of consumption that they have outside of the VECO program. So there's a lot of diversity happening, but yeah, certainly I think bulk procurement, we can kind of criticise it, that it is, you know, corporate interest, but also it's about saving money for councils and therefore saving rates.
Look, if I can chime in as well, being a councillor on Northern Grampians Shire Council, there's a lot of activity behind the meter on community developments. One of the biggest challenges that council has, of course, is money. We've gone from, well, I won't bore you with the decline in fags, but we're severely limited in cash. And if we had some more, I'm sure we would be able to do some more. Certainly Northern Grampians is a small shire of about 11,500 people. I hear Moreland is growing by 12,500 people per week. So our shire every week in the metropoles, it's just resource constriction.
Thanks, Eddie. There's a couple more questions. One probably for you, Ian, from Daryl Sherger. Why has there been no consideration of home heat demand? It's around 60% of average home energy used and occurs when solar is at a minimum. Shifting summer solar output to this winter demand requires very large battery storage. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Yeah.
Hi, Daryl. You know my opinion. I 100% agree with you, and it's certainly something that we're looking at with our new retail offering. What happens in the Hepburn Shire at 11 o'clock every night is that's our peak moment because everyone's hot water systems, you know, come online. So it makes no sense. It doesn't align with, you know, the level of rooftop solar that's happening. And I think, you know, demand management, smart energy technology is really, really important. So absolutely, I think it's vital.
Paul, I think Daryl's question was probably targeted at the cemeteries, because I talked about how there was all this excess heat coming from the crematorium that we couldn't use. And look, I've worked extensively with Daryl on looking at bioenergy and district heating programs. And look, down the track, maybe that's something we can actually look at, is all of that heat being taken from a community facility like a cemetery and piped to residential networks. But what we've experienced in Sweden and other places is when you build the infrastructure, you dig the trench and you put all of the NBN and the gas and the water and the hot water and the cold water in the trench at the one time. And that's how it happens. To go back and retrofit, you know, the Ballarat network is really, really expensive and hard. And look, maybe it happened down the track, but at this point in time, we couldn't find an end user of that heat.
And yes, heat is a challenge, particularly when you're talking about gases that have a low specific energy. You can certainly convert them readily into electricity, but the conversion rate is around about 8% or less. So there's a real challenge. If it was hot water, different story, or steam, but hot gases, not so great.
Okay, we are running over time, so I'll take one last question from David Anstey, who's basically saying, in a bushfire situation, can microgrids island and continue to provide power? How can an islanded microgrid be for a bushfire an entire feeder? So will microgrids handle the extremes of bushfires?
I think the question is more about islanding. How big can the island be?
Yeah.
I'm going to give that one to you, Taryn.
Yeah, that's fine. So I guess there's a lot of talk about microgrids in the Victorian context, but there hasn't been any fully islandable microgrids deployed yet in the Victorian context. So it's still a work in progress, but what's going to be likely first is at the transformer level. So, you know, a street of houses will be able to be islandable through to kind of communities that are near the end of the line of the grid. They will also be able to be islandable. Whole feeders have options in regards to, I guess, switching for which ones are taking which current. So there are some options at a feeder level, at a zone substation level already. But yeah, I think it'll be a work in progress. I think it'll happen quickly, but yeah, certainly at that street level, it should be possible in the very near future.
Islanding is a real challenge, not just for the participant, but also for Powercore. Whether you have active switching of transformer stations at the 66 kilovolt and lesser, there's some serious engineering issues and policy issues that have got to be overcome first, and the inertia there is huge.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I think there's a lot of comments and a couple other comments on there. For any answers we haven't got to, and I haven't had a chance to check all the chat yet, but we are running well over time now. So I'd like to thank the people who did the presentation, and Marie, who must have had some technical problems because we've lost her along the way. And I've also got some problems here, but please contact us at Grampians CPH at breeze.org.au, email us at there. We also will send out to everyone some sites and stuff to grab some more information from. And thank you for that, and for everyone else. We do really, on my screen is playing up against now too, so I can't actually switch to a couple of other ones, but last of all, I just hope this has been useful for you tonight. We're just beginning this journey. For some of us, the trip may be short and sweet. For others, it may be longer and take a lot more effort. No matter what your journey, we're here to help you and your community to be a more sustainable future. So thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you for the panelists for their time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.